She has been in the field of special education for 20 years. She began her career in K-12 as an elementary special education teacher in the DC public schools, where she served for the next 12 years as department and the IEP chairperson and the director of special education at the district level coordinator for instruction, autism, and alternative assessments. While she's been in Texas, she's served as a regional education specialist, and she's currently an assistant professor and an extension specialist at Texas A&M University, AgriLife Extension, where she supports individuals with disabilities and those who support them, all the while encouraging universal design for learning principles. She's been in higher education as an adjunct faculty member for 11 years. Since she's heard about universal design for learning in 2010, she's dedicated much of her research, teaching, and consultation to spreading knowledge of what and how UDL supports teaching and learning. Within a few short weeks, she will become an employee of CAST, where UDL was conceptualized, and will continue her work in supporting educators in their development, understanding, and utilization of universal design for learning. She is personally the mother of two, ages 3 and 5, and she's the wife of a faculty administrator in the College of Education and Human Development at Texas A&M. Dr. Singer, thank you so much for being here today, and it's your turn to take over.
Thank you, everyone. And I am super excited that you all took time out of your afternoon to be with us, with me, and learn more about this exciting topic. I could speak forever and a day, literally, on universal design for learning. And so it was very challenging to really narrow the focus, if you will, to just a lot for the 45 minutes. So I will say up front that I am very open to conversations, to emails, whether they be Zoom meetings, what have you, after this, to address any specific concerns, issues, things that you may want to utilize in your classroom, or what the role that you serve, and how UDL can help enhance that. So thank you to Christy and Megan for inviting me here. There's no pressure that I'm the first one here, none whatsoever. But this is a topic that's, you know, if I was going to speak about anything, I'm glad that it's universal design for learning. The other thing, as Megan mentioned, so I've been at Texas A&M for about 5 years, and the next week or so, I actually will be leaving AgriLife Extension. Very sad, but I will be joining the team at the Center for Applied Special Technologies remotely. This is where Universal Design for Learning was birthed. And the only reason why I'm repeating that is because I think Megan's speaker went in and out, but I am still here. So please feel free to use my email address that you'll see at the end of the presentation. And yeah, without further ado, I'll just get right on in. I have, let's make sure that technology is going to support me today, right? Because it either works or it doesn't. Universal Design for Learning, supporting all or supporting diverse learners, which is why we are here. I always start with expectations. And Megan did give you a few, but if you could just mute yourself if you aren't already. I am very open to, you know, for verbal conversations. I would ask though that, you know, if you have a specific question or a specific need or a specific area that may be too focused for our conversation, that maybe we just set up a time afterwards or ask the question at the end, so that we can kind of proceed. First and foremost, please, please, please engage. You put in what you get out, right? And so Universal Design for Learning, the most important thing about the framework in of itself is engagement. And so make sure that you're engaged, react. So those reactions at the bottom of your Zoom, yeah, they're there for a reason. So go ahead and, you know, put in thumbs up, hearts, emojis. I wish there was a sad face. I wish there was kind of like a confused face there because it would help me out. Be critical, ask questions. Last but not least, and I'm sorry, I always put a time on here because I will go and go and go and go. Be mindful. So we all are here because of something that we're in search of. And so everyone's journey is a little different. Some of you may have been practicing universal design for learning and just wanted to see, you know, was there anything new? Was there something that you haven't thought about in a long time? And some of you, this may be your very first exposure to the framework. So let's all be mindful that we're here for a reason and just be open, you know, to each other's levels. The other thing is, like any good instructor or teacher, we start with learning objectives. And so I have 4 that I know we will cover today. And the first one is to understand and identify tenets of universal design for learning. I will probably spend quite a bit of time on that because I think it's the understanding of what the framework is the foundation for actually being able to utilize it in whatever role you're playing, whatever role you're in. You're going to have an understanding once you leave here about how you can apply UDL to your practice. We're going to look at some examples of how UDL has been utilized or can be utilized. And then we're going to explore some recommendations and resources that you will have access to once we are finished the session here. So hopefully this is a good thing. If you feel like just based on what I just said, you think you may get something from it, if you could just use a reaction and give me a thumbs up, or I can see most of you, so you can give me a thumbs up on your as well. Thank you. Okay, awesome. All right. So what is our learning goal for today? If you would go and enter that Nearpod, I am going to ask that you, there we go. I see many of you have already responded. And so it seems like most of you are interested in, actually we have a wide range of learners here. So some of you want to just understand, many of you have, most of you actually, excuse me, want to know how to incorporate the ideas of UDL into your classroom. And then a few of you are looking for some additional resources. So great. I feel like we are good. I feel like you're going to be able to take away a lot from this session. And so we'll just go ahead. Thank you for being able to do that. Okay, so what the other thing that I've done, and this is for you, is created a live binder. So this live binder is here for you. We're going to have an activity later on in this session or in our talk on it. But if you would, if you're in, I'm sure you're obviously at your computer, if you could go ahead and have access to this. I'm going to click on it very quickly, and I hope it does not mess up my computer, because you know how it goes sometimes. Can you guys see the live binder? If you could give me a thumbs up.
We can see it on your screen.
Okay, perfect.
In your slides, if they have the copy of the slides ahead of time, can they click on, is there a link for them to click on?
Yes, the links are, the hyperlinks are embedded. Okay, so just so that you see here what we'll be looking at, I just kind of want to give you a glimpse. I have a resource that you will have access to forever, as long as you want it. It doesn't seem like the password is necessary, but if it ever asks you for one, just know that it's TAMU UDL. And we'll be exploring a lot of the resources that are here, but how this works, it's a 3-ring binder digitally, if you will. And so you can click on, you know, about higher ed and UDL, and you'll see some subtabs that come up, but each one of these are resources for you. Okay, so you see UDL guidelines, You'll see this here. This is actually a live hyperlink of the guidelines, which we'll talk about, but just know that this is here. And it would be great if when I'm talking to you about the guidelines, if you have this open so that you can see exactly what I mean, and I will show you how it's laid out and everything. Okay, so just know that this is here. I wanted you to understand what was there and how it was organized. So I'm going to do another share and go back to my screen. Okay, am I back to my PowerPoint?
You are.
Okay, beautiful, thank you. All right, so engagement is a huge part of universal design for learning. And so we're gonna play a game, because who doesn't like games? The idea behind this, and I have set my expectations high because I know that you will be able to do this, is that you will, as I am talking with you today, tell me, kind of like a bingo game, if you will, when you can pick 7 of these words and explain them to us in terms of how these words connect to universal design for learning. Some of them you may know already, just like in layman's terms, but some of them you may not understand or may not know exactly what it means in relationship to universal design for learning. So the first person, and you can stop me, the first person that can come to us and who wouldn't be too shy, if you want to verbally say it to us over Zoom, or you want to put it in the chat. Christy, I'd ask that you, if you could just look to see if there's anyone who, you can say bingo, you can say I got it, you can say whatever you want to let me know that you can make the connections with 7 of these words. I have a special prize for you. And so there is a grid here, and the first word is framework, and to the right of it, the word is barriers. To the right of that is the word flexible, and then there's methods to the right of that. And then one more column, the word is access. So then I'm going at the bottom now, under the word framework, is learning environment. Learning environment, and then learning variability, and then goals, material, and universal. So again, the idea behind this is that you will explain 7 of these words in terms of universal design for learning. So are you guys up for the challenge? If you could just use your reactions, that would be great. Cool. Yay. All right. So let's move right along. And once you have those 7 words and you can tell me how they connect to you, you would have won. All right. So let's get right in it. The first thing about universal design for learning that you probably are interested in is, what the heck is it? And universal design for learning is considered a framework. And what this framework was intended to do is to guide our thinking as we are creating learning activities, developing instructional material, and designing learning environments that may have unintentionally have some barriers, right? And we are trying to shift these experiences from ones that have barriers to ones that are barrier free. And so what does this mean? I'm going to tell you about that. And for the next 40 minutes, maybe a little less, we will talk about, well, what barriers might exist in how and what I teach. And so I'm glad you asked that. To the right of this definition here that was provided by Lordy Nelson in 2004 from her book, Design and Deliver, this is a picture of the actual framework. And we'll talk about how it's structured and exactly what it means. So just think of UDL as a framework that guides our thinking and our actions as we're designing learning instruction and the learning environments. Okay, so what else is universal design for learning? 3 things here. It's kind of admission of the fact that we understand that there's no one size fits all in anything. And I think as educators, a lot of times we know that, but how do we address that? Universal design allows for us to move away or step away from that thinking and to provide alternatives that are appropriate and that are appropriate for all students. And And so Universal Design for Learning also says that we are not going to wait until after we've created our lessons and then add some pieces because we find out that a few students aren't able to access the information. But as we are designing these activities and these environments, we're going to be purposeful or intentional in how we design them so that it makes those things more open or more flexible, and allows more of our students or more of our learners to access the information. So this idea is that there's not just access for students. A lot of times when we talk about accessibility or access, we talk about it in terms of individuals with disabilities. But this truly is providing access to all. And we'll talk about who is in the all, right? All. So in education, you know that we're very smart. We are very smart. And we're so smart that generally when there's a new framework or new idea, and we don't create it, right? We take kind of what's been discovered in maybe another field or so, and we try to tweak it a little bit and make it fit in education. Well, that was the idea for Universal Design for Learning. This framework came about as a result of Ron Mace's work in North Carolina, who was in the field of architecture, and he himself had a physical impairment. And so what he kind of set out to do was to make sure that the designs and the creation of buildings or architects were physically accessible to anyone, to everyone, mainly for individuals with physical disabilities. But what they found were a few things. Not only did it help support those individuals who had physical disabilities, but it helps support a lot of other individuals. So for example, you see in our picture here that there's ramps, right? And so as a mother of two very young children, sometimes I have them in the stroller. So that would help me. If I needed to access this building, I could, roll the ramp up. If you think about curb cuts, you think about the sidewalks, excuse me, I can't even talk, the walkways, right, that are there that were intended for individuals with disabilities. But what we found is in being intentional about helping individuals with disabilities, we have opened up and allowed all individuals to access, in this case, a physical building or a sidewalk. The other thing that came from this was that it was less expensive to have these ramps blueprint and to build them when they were building the actual building, as opposed to trying to retrofit, as you see in the second picture. And oftentimes it's either very hard for people to access that, or if you see, it just doesn't look very well. And if you know any architectures, they pride themselves on the way things look, on the way buildings look. So those were two things that we gleaned from the field of architecture. And these individuals at CAST, Center of Applied Special Technology, says, you know what, they're on to something, these people in architecture. When we plan for our learning environments and we plan our learning goals, materials that we're going to use, the methods that we're going to use to teach, and our assessments, when we plan for those, we should think about, quote unquote, those in the margin. If you think of a bell curve, oftentimes when we're creating things, we think of an average learner, which UDL is very, very adamant to emphasize that there's no such thing as an average learner. But oftentimes that's how the type of learner we use to create these things. So what about those individuals who are at the margins, either the students with disabilities or the students who've been labeled gifted and talented? If we plan for them, what we find is that we have planned for everyone in between. And so that's the idea behind Universal Design for Learning. And so legislation, right? they picked up on this and they said, you know what, this is an awesome framework. We feel like this can truly open up the doors for allowing all learners to have access to the information, okay? A big thing that we talk about in education in general, but within universal design for learning, is that there is a range of learners that exist in our student population. So learners by nature of just by nature, we're always going to have students who have a disability, whether it's seen or unseen. We're always, and I say always, going to have students whose English may not be their second language, and or the technical terminology that we use to teach may be not understandable to them. We may have first generation students in our classroom, and I'm thinking about just the diversity that exists within our own student population here at A&M. And then we're going to have some students where perhaps this is their first time in the US, right? And so their experiences that we tend to draw upon may not be as validated for them. And so because this learner variability exists, right? This variability in the way or diversity that we have, this learner variability is going to exist. So they all experience things differently, and so they're all going to learn differently. And so the higher education opportunity that the Universal Design for Learning UDL, right, refers to this scientific framework that incorporates the ideas that information can be represented differently. We want to make sure we address the diversity in the class. That we should use tactics that engage students differently because everyone is different, and that we should allow for opportunities for these different learners to demonstrate the best way that they feel they can. UDL also, like I said before, barriers, and I'll show you a couple examples of that. Also want to make sure that we're providing accommodations and supports and challenges. It just means that if we set high expectations, the idea is that we will have those scaffolds there so that we aren't low expectations, but that we're setting those high expectations, right? Those 7 words that you have to make the connection with. And I'll make sure that we set those high expectations for all of our students. Questions or concerns up until this point?
There aren't any in the chat, but if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We'll just give you 30 seconds or so to do that. Have a question? Okay, if you think of something, just put it in the chat or let us know that you want to ask a question. We can do it that way also.
Yep. Okay, sounds great. All right. So the framework is based on, and they say it's scientifically validated, right? So the science behind universal design for learning is a combination of educational research, a lot of neuroscience, behavioralists, cognitive behavioralists, and teachers, right? Educators. And so what they did was they looked at brain activity during task, right? So they asked individuals to either learn something, write something or read something, and they looked at how the different neurons fire. And so they found that when individuals were engaged, that network, okay, fired. It was illuminated. And so if you see their affective network of the brain is what keeps learners motivated and okay, it's the why of learning, if you will. And so that has implications for us as educators, because if students aren't engaged, they're not going to learn. Okay, and so the most. And so you see under the affective examples, one instructional strategy that you could use are things like tic-tac-toe, or like a bingo game with several different activities, and allow students to choose which activity they do within the parameters that you set. The other thing, or the next thing, the next principle, and we'll get there in just a second, is this recognition network. So what UDL says is that when students are presented with information, in order for them to understand it, they have to do what's best for them, right? There's connections that they have to make. There's background information that they have to pull from. And because all of these experiences for individuals are different, we have to provide a different way to present information in multiple ways. Okay, so not everyone is going to learn through us talking. So we need to have some visuals in there as well. So some examples of this that you could do in your classroom is to have textbooks that have the same topic, but that are presented in a different way. So some students are very skilled with the technical jargon. Let's say that they are in a particular field or something. Some students may want more graphics, if you will. So some students like the forest, some students like the trees, right? So are there different perspectives of the same topic? The other thing that I loved, and I'm pulling this from a particular resource in UDL, it's called UDL on the Cloud, is to have student note takers. And so because learners are diverse, how they learn and how they take notes are very different. There was a study that they did where they looked at students in a particular class and they looked at their notes. Some students wrote every single word or tried to at least, that the professor said. Some wrote just short one sentence words. Some just drew pictures because that's what activated, or that's what would later activate their understanding. And so if you take a collection of those, perhaps in your classroom, then you have a wide variety of notes. And so being able to post those or put them available to all of the class would ensure that there is a way that someone is able to understand that information. And then the last piece is the strategic network, which during these, if you think about what this is how do we strategize when we're learning? A lot of times we want to, or we need to regulate, if you will, if we're learning or not. And so how do we make connections to things that we've experienced in the past or something that we read yesterday so that we can understand that? And so the implications that we have for this is that all of us have different strategies for learning. And so we want to make sure that we're providing multiple opportunities for students to be able to understand, but also a big part of this is for students to demonstrate what we know. So I am very curious as to whether anyone gives different forms of assessments, or do you say, here is the multiple choice assessment that we're going to take today, right? And so if we use a multiple choice test, that may not be the best way for all. In fact, we know that it's not going to be the best way for all of our learners to demonstrate what they know. And so having a variety of ways that students can express themselves and their understanding of your content is really important as it relates to the strategic network. Okay. Again, a lot of information. I'm just waiting for y'all. So just putting all of this together, I would like a framework that those three areas of the brain, the affective network, is going to be linked to multiple means of engagement, which is the first principle of universal design for learning. And this is why the heck am I learning this? Like, if you haven't gotten that in your classroom, then that's good. That tells me that students they have an understanding of why they're there. And it's more than just, it's a requirement, right? The other piece, the next piece is multiple means of representation. So this is a second principle. And this is the what of learning. So, and I'm going to go back up to engagement for just a second. how this reads is when you provide multiple means of engagement, the goal of UDL becomes to create purposeful and motivated learners. Following suit, when you provide multiple means of representation, you ensure that students comprehend the content, but you also create resourceful and knowledgeable learners. They know how they learn best. And so they're going to use those ways to make sure that they can access the content. And then that last piece is multiple means of action and expression. So it's the how of learning. And this relates to learners being very goal-driven and that self-regulatory and executive functioning piece, thinking about their thinking. Okay, so I feel like I've just been talking, and I see a few things in the chat, but I know that Christy is on it. This is the actual framework and the way that the guidelines are laid out, okay? And so ideally, if you are using Universal Design for Learning, this piece of paper right here, or probably a digital version, will be your best friend. It may or may not, just depending how deep you get into it, right? So, so what does all of this mean? All right, like I said, this is how the framework is broken up. There are 3 principles. And if you want to, you can access these guidelines on the Live Binder under the UDL guidelines. There is a digital version of this, and they have hyperlinked. Things are hyperlinked. So it gives you a deeper dive or deeper explanation of what each of these things mean. So like I said, the first 3 are principles. You have multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and then multiple means of an action and expression. And because we said this natural learner variability exists, we have to provide multiple means of this. And if we want to truly ensure that all students are accessing the information. Going a little bit further into the actual framework itself, you have the guidelines. And so how this reads is that in order to, one way to provide multiple means of engagement is to provide options for recruiting interest. Well, Shantae, I have no idea how to do that. And so I'm going to show you what the guidelines say. If you want to provide options for recruiting interest, here are 3 ways that you can do it. You can optimize students' choice and autonomy. You can optimize relevance, value, and authenticity, and you can minimize threats and distractions. Now, just looking at this, we may or may not know what that means. But if you look at the guidelines that I have there, you can actually click on each of these checkpoints to see what the guideline means. And if you want to provide choice and autonomy in what you're teaching, it's going to give you some actual strategies into how you are doing this. Okay, so moving right along, why is this important? And I'm going to check in. I'm going to do it in. So one big thing, again, on the lines of Universal Design for Learning is feedback. Okay? So feedback is really important to me because that's going to help me reflect on what I'm doing and how I'm doing so that I can make this content more relevant, engaging, and accessible to you. So any questions out there?
Sante, I have a question, I think maybe just a clarification.
Okay.
Could you speak a little bit about, we have the different ways of multiple means of representation and engagement, and sometimes I feel like people can get caught up a little bit in which one is it, and I need to make sure I've got this and that, and maybe speak about how it's really the overall,
That's right.
At it versus getting caught up.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, so in a nutshell, right? And that actually is another point of this. In a nutshell, we want to make sure that we're doing a variety of things to help motivate learners, that we are presenting information in a variety of ways, and that we're allowing students to demonstrate what they know in a lot of ways. So if you're doing those three things, you know, from a broad perspective, then you are thinking with your UDL lens on. So again, those three things are you're motivating and you're providing options for students to have choice and autonomy. You are presenting things in multiple ways, so not just, you know, verbally, but you have multiple ways of presenting content, and you're varying the type of assessments that you have. Okay. And so towards the end of this session, I'm going to allow you some time to actually look at the guidelines and look at some examples so that you have more lucrative examples of what this looks like in practice.
Thank you. That is super helpful. The way you just said it was awesome. That I get too caught up sometimes in all of those words and what do they mean and what
That's right.
Which, and what you just said is perfect.
Okay, awesome, great. And so if you think about those three things, we want to make sure that we are UDLizing, if you will, for lack of a better word, those four parts, if you will, of instruction. And this is kind of one of those deep details. And so I'm again want to make sure that I give you an overview of it, but I would like for you to look a little further into our live binder so that you can get a better understanding. And then when we come back, perhaps you will have some clarification questions. So the idea is that we will take those principles, the engagement, the multiple means of representation, which is the content, and the action and expression, and we'll apply those things to our instructional goals, to our methods that we use to teach, to the material that we use to teach, and to the assessments. But just realizing that we need options. Okay, it's just we can't do that one thing and make sure that and ensure that everyone is understanding. So I want to give you some examples, some very brief examples, and this is kind of interactive. So if you guys wouldn't mind either just embedding some pieces into the chat or go ahead and unmuting yourself. In order for me to open my goals or to make goals more flexible, there's a few things that we can do. So if you just look at this goal here, which for this teacher, they wanted the students to read about the Harlem Renaissance and then to write a paper about the Harlem Renaissance. Just looking at that goal, who or what kind of barriers may exist? Like who would not be able to meet that goal? And I will do this for you. So some students may not be good writers. Perhaps they either have a processing issue, or perhaps they may have a physical impairment that actually prevents them from writing. So this is a barrier. Now, this is probably a very lucrative assignment, right, for some. But by putting that prescription of writing about the Harlem Renaissance, you have narrowed the ability for all of your students to actually engage in that. Two things with this. If your goal is for your students to understand the Harlem Renaissance, perhaps some of them would prefer to draw a picture. Perhaps some of them would prefer to type, right? A type of paper. Perhaps some of them would prefer to verbally explain to you what their thoughts are on Harlem Renaissance. And not only is it their preference, but they do a better job of demonstrating their understanding through that method than they would through writing. So instead of writing, write a paper about the Harlem Renaissance, you could say something like, describe the Harlem Renaissance. And so do you see how I've opened that goal so that more students are able to access and more students are able to meet that goal? And that really does make, it's very helpful to students when they know that that is a component that they don't have to worry about. So I told you that was one thing. Now, if you're in an English class and one of your standards or one of your standards of learning is to see how students are able to write in that technical writing, then the only way that they can do that pretty much is to write. Now, they may need some supports in writing, right? So they may need some computer assisted technologies to support them, but they have to write. So understanding the intent behind the goal is really important as we are developing learning goals so that we know that students are able to meet those goals and that we haven't put any intentional or unintentional, barriers in the type of learning goal that we create. All right. And so these are just some other examples in terms of our methods. So if you can imagine thinking, using lecture is probably not the most motivating all the time, right? So you want to divvy it up sometimes or change it up as much as you can, really, so that students are able to get that information. The material that we use. So often, not only in higher education, but in the world, I feel like we rely a lot on text-based material. And when we do, or printed material, when we do, we set unintentional barriers for individual learners where English may not be their first language, students who have difficulty reading. If your goal is understanding, then why can't they just listen? Why can't they listen to the text as opposed to being able to read it? So again, are these unintentional barriers preventing students from accessing or being able to understand the content that is being presented? The last assessment, I remember in a lot of my stats classes, we would they would give us word problems, right? And so I never thought of this until I started diving into the world of universal design for learning. When you give word problems, there may be some students that struggle with understanding what the word problems are asking. Now, is your goal for them to understand the word problem or to be able to complete the quadratic equation? And so, not saying that it's not a good option, but for all students, it may not be the best way to understand what it is you want them to do, which is to be able to solve that quadratic equation. So again, we don't want to give all word problems. We want to have options so that students have the best chance of being able to demonstrate what they know. Perhaps we use word problems and we use actual equations, or we read those word problems out to them so that it takes that barrier of not being able to read or comprehend away from the student. All right, I'm checking in while I get this video set up. Anything, Christy?
No, there were some good thoughts with what you had just talked about barriers with writing and language were some of the barriers that students might face in those assignments. And then just the idea of coming up with alternatives like a diorama or a speech or something like that instead of writing. So
yeah,
good thoughts there.
Okay, perfect, great. So we're making those connections. And in the UDL guidelines, as you'll see shortly, there are a lot of options, a lot of tools that are there for you that can be incorporated into your practice. And so this literally is, I think, like 1 minute and 48 seconds. And I think once we get to this point, all of a sudden we become like, holy smoke, how am I going to do all of this? It's going to take so much time, so overwhelming. So I just want you to take a breath. I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to listen to this video. Can you guys see that? I may have to reshare. I believe you guys can see that.
We can see it.
And I'll see if you can tell me if you can hear it in just a second.
We can hear it.
Okay, there we go. Maybe. You could hear it.
We could hear it for just a second.
Where'd it go? There we go.
So one advice to getting started with UDL is to take it in small steps and then pick an actual scenario. Don't be hypothetical. Pick a situation in your class today that you want to address or you want to change and start with that.
I really focus on creating very tight goals that are very clear and then building multiple means by which students can operate on those goals across the course and within each session.
The key thing is really making sure that your students are helping you drive the changes that you're going to make. They're going to be a great guide about what aspect of UDL you need to focus on. What's your biggest need? Do they need you to give them more flexibility around assignments? Do they need you just to focus on making some richer materials and not presenting everything one way?
It's a dynamic process. There's nothing formulaic about this. Students are very open in telling you what works, what doesn't work, and what faculty learn is how to bring students who've been on the margins to center stage.
It's not necessary for me to make sweeping changes all at once. If I just think about each assignment and think about ways that it could be informed or changed by the UDL framework, then over time I will have created a more universally designed course.
Okay, awesome. So now here's the application piece of our day. I'd like for you to think of think of one of the areas, whether it's your learning goals, your methods, your materials. Perhaps you can even be more specific and say, I want to make my syllabus more flexible, or I want to make my learning environment more accessible. I want you to literally commit to it. So decide what it is. So you can write it down perhaps on a piece of paper or something that you have next to you. Think about what you might do, and I'm hopefully the resources will help you do that. And then how you'll do it. So what will you do and how will you do it? Will you make sure that there are engagement pieces in there? Will you make sure that there are ways that students can have choice? How will you do it? So perhaps you will create like a tic-tac-toe board for students to choose from, or you'll give them just options. And then when will you do it, right? So are you going to do it in your class next week? Are you going to do it in your class over the summer? Or are you to say, you know what, I need some more time to learn. I will start in the fall. And so I want you to make this commitment to yourself, okay? And then for the next, how much more time do we have, Christy?
It looks like we have about 9 minutes.
Okay, so for the next 5 minutes, and my screen seems to have like, I don't know what it did something that all of the content is not there. I would like for us to spend some time in the live binder for you to explore, okay? And so we're going to take 3 minutes for you to explore individually. And then after the 3 minutes are up, I'm going to put you guys in groups in Zoom breakout rooms based on the topic that you chose, and you will put yourself in the groups and then talk about how you think this live binder will help you, or be honest with me. If you don't think it will, let me know. What are some resources that you may use or that you can use, you found useful to keep that commitment to yourself, the one that you just wrote down? And then what other type of questions or supports would you think that you would need in order to keep that commitment, okay, to take your first bite, right? How do we eat an elephant? Which sometimes this can seem like an elephant. So I'm gonna put a timer up and for you to explore that live binder. And then I'm gonna set up the breakout rooms so that you all can converse amongst one another, okay? Set the timer. And maybe we'll just do, yes.
There is also a question in the chat.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So it is, how similar or different is UDL to the Quality Matters rubric in regards to online learning? And how do you evaluate and or create net rubrics if you're allowing multiple ways for students to deliver assignments? So kind of if you've got different ways of doing assignments, how do you do rubrics that are equivalent with those different ways? And then I'm not sure how familiar you are with Quality Matters. I know I'm not super familiar.
Yes, so I'm not familiar with Quality Matters. It seems like you said that there are some rubrics that exist. And I would think that rubrics, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, that rubrics are generally open or flexible so that they can be applied to several situations or possibilities. Now, if they are not, so for example, if you are in a content area where a specific action or a specific skill has to be demonstrated as part of a course, then that's fine. You have, in order for you to assess that, if you have to assess that one thing, then you assess that one thing, but it's the how you assess that one thing that becomes more open or more flexible. So if you want to unmute yourself and tell me a little bit about the Quality Matters rubric, I would be more than happy to address that. But if that answer suffices, then let me know.
And I'm
so
not sure.
Okay.
Oh.
So I think Megan just told me that I need to shorten this, which is fine. So if you guys would, and I had already set the timer, if you could look through the live binder and just tell me perhaps, so we won't do the group activity, even though that's a bummer because I think collaboration is important. But I want to make sure that I respect everyone's time. Let me know something that's there that you feel would be beneficial for you in your quest or in your commitment to that you just made to yourself. So we'll change up just a little bit. And so we'll have that discussion. So feel free to jump on. Once you notice something that's beneficial to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Janina Siebert, and I just wanted to thank you for your time today. This binder is dense, so I have not seen every single thing that I'm sure is going to be very, very helpful. But my eye was drawn to the PDF file that you have linked, 8 ways to use EDL incorporated into A&M courses. So
okay,
so it'll
awesome. Oh yeah, awesome. So Christy, Megan, and I presented that at the Able Adaptive conference a few years back. And so I put that there because I think it's an awesome way to give lucrative examples of how you can incorporate these pieces into your classroom. So thank you for that. That's great feedback.
And there's a couple of comments about providing options for expression and communication. I think there's a lot of thought around that. And learning goals allow students to be comfortable with how they complete assignments, while teachers can be true to their learning outcomes and goals. So I think some of the thought is, what do you want them to learn? Not necessarily, that's where you start, and then you figure out how they can demonstrate that they've learned it. And if you didn't see, I put a little thing in the chat. So I'm a little bit on a soapbox about thinking about other ways of assessing besides exams.
That's right.
Most of us never have to take an exam in the real world. And
that's
so
right.
How are we demonstrating that we know material? And it takes creativity and it takes some extra work. But I think once you get to some ideas and the ways to assess, it can be really exciting to be able to see students demonstrating their knowledge in different ways.
That's absolutely correct. And the level of creativity that that comes with students a lot of times, and I will date myself. Some of the options that I give to students are pretty archaic sometimes. And so when I open it up to, create an artifact or create or develop a profile or something like that, it is amazing the creativity that they come up with that I would never have thought of. And so then when you have those options, then you to assess those, then you create rubrics with certain parameters. And oftentimes when I do something like that, I will have students actually look at the parameters and create a rubric as to how they think they should be graded. And then I use that the next semester. And so a lot of these things I will ask students to do as part of the assignment, and then I can later in turn use them in my practice.
And I want to point out real quick too, because I love when people put things in the chat. Tara had a great idea. She said she's been doing an assignment that has students do a short technical memo, a tweet, and a meme on the same topic. And they're so
awesome.
creative and have fun with it. And I'm assuming that Tara also probably has fun grading those assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that can be really cool. Just seeing, like you say, the memes that they come up with. Someone also said that they're not an instructor in the classroom, and this is actually doesn't even have to be just faculty and student. As a professional developer, I work in the workforce, and so anytime you're talking about learning or creating or designing learning activities or environments, these thoughts and being proactive really should be adhered to or really should be considered as you are developing those things.
So Shantae, we are at 2:29.
Yes, and so I'm done. And so like I said, I am hoping that live binder is very informative for you. If you feel like there's something that you want more of, what's great about this is that it's fluid and flexible. So you say, you know what, Shantae, I really need some more information on online classes. I will be more than happy to put up resources on developing online classes and things of that nature. So feel free just to shoot me an email, and I will put that not just for you, because I would like everyone to be able to get information from that. So remember those 7 words. And here's my contact information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shantae. Megan has put in the chat the link to the survey, and she's going to send that out through email also. We really, really value your input, and it's pretty short. That we have a series that we're doing. So I put a link also to the, actually I didn't send it yet, there we go, to the Accessibility in Aggieland series. So there's several more of these presentations, and Megan and I are hopeful we can continue to do these, and maybe at some point we could develop it into a once a month series or something, just so that we can get the word out to people. But we would encourage you to come to any of those other programs. If there's other things you would like to see presented, we can also develop those. So please do the survey, and just join me in thanking Shantae for her time. This is a volunteer thing she did for us, and we really appreciate her knowledge and her experience. So thank you all for being here and hanging in with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank y'all.